Welcome to the We're At Party, brought to you by VeryBusy.io. I'm Peter Hunner. I'm a co-founder of VeryBusy, and today we got a great one. First of all, we got Danielle Ezzo here. She's an important part to this because we're going to be talking about AI, image making, as an art, both commercially, fine art, and a lot of different factors about how AI is affecting and influencing our industry today, the photography industry. But first of all, Danielle, thanks for being here. Really happy to have you come on and chat with me. Little background on you: multi-disciplinary, say that word, artist, retoucher, writer, educator. You know, your creative expertise has spanned several domains, and particularly everything kind of evolves around photography, maybe specific kind of topics in landscaping, visual literacy, synthetic images. So first of all, I mean, you're a great person to come in and talk with me about AI. But then also just within your own personal practice on building and incorporating AI into your work. Both, I think, we could talk about from the commercial side and both from your personal practice of photography and what or within art and what you're actually doing. And I learned this recently because I didn't know it before, but you're at ICP, International Center of Photography, teaching now,
Yeah, this is
which
very
is
new, so I wouldn't blame
amazing.
you if you didn't know before.
No, I think it's fantastic because I think teachers are the best to talk with because you thoroughly think about these topics and repercussions, influences, all these kinds of things. So I tried one semester. I taught a post-production retouching class at Minneapolis College of Art and Design, which I enjoyed, but it wasn't for me. That was the only time I did it.
Yeah,
But
I think it takes a certain kind of personality for sure.
yeah. But thanks for being here. Anything I missed in there, I think in terms of what we're going to be talking about, I want to start off with how you got to where you are now, from being, a teacher now or teaching, but also as having your own retouching studio, D Digital, off in Brooklyn, which is kind of the commercial side of your practice. But then also the artistic side of your practice. You're a working artist.
Yeah.
Between all these factors, how did you get to where you are today? What came first? What were the stepping stones to your progression in your career?
Yeah, totally. Well, thanks for having me. It's such a treat for us to get to be able to talk in this format, given that we've had such a long business relationship together, and it's, inevitably always through email. So now we get to add another
Right?
virtual dimension to it, which is lovely.
Heck yeah.
So I'm super excited for the conversation. But you're right. I'm doing a lot. And I would say that it was never very intentional. I think as a young person, I knew I wanted to be an artist first and foremost. I didn't really know the path that I would take with that. As I got more into photography and photo-based media, all the decisions I made in regard to just trying to exist in the world and finance my life and just figure out how one operates as an artist, everything was in service to being a creative person. And so when I started retouching, I guess it was about 11 or 12 years ago now, it felt like such a fantastic complement to the work that I was already doing. And I've always been interested in photography, I think not for the same reasons that most people are interested in it. I was interested in how it lies and how it obstructs the truth more than tells the truth. And so I think coming into post-production and retouching and working with constructed images just felt like this very natural fit for me. Because of how I've structured my business, which for many years was freelancing, I was able to allow myself the room to also make art in tandem to making money. And I felt, I think now I'm in a place where I'm kind of reevaluating how I need to structure that. But for many years, that was very successful. And then the teaching, as I mentioned, and even writing has been newer in the sense that I always thought that all these tracks were very separate. My fine art was separate from my retouching, was separate from my writing, and teaching is just like a totally new thing. But like, I think it's only been in the last 5 or so years that I've really embraced the fact that I'm concerned with the same problems in all of those domains, and actually they're part of the same thing. And I don't know, I think I've just had like a a weird reaction to this idea of being a multi-hyphenate and like a master of none. And so I think I've had a lot of friction in my own head about like just owning what that means. And I think it's now that I am, it's good. And I think it's was meant to be this way. And then, as
Yeah.
I said, the teaching thing, I maybe right out of grad school, which was about 10 years ago now, I've had people along the line say, "Oh, you would be a very good teacher." And I just was like, "That's thank you. But also, like, do you know what adjunct professors make? Like, no, I'd rather stick to advertising money. Thank you."
Yeah.
But I think as time has gone on, I really have embraced that because I think I am very passionate about what I do, and I think students respond to that type of enthusiasm. So I've embraced it, and I really love ICP is like my new home to do that. And it's not set in stone yet, but in the near future, I'm hoping to teach a visual literacy class where I'm building the curriculum out now. So we're going to be talking about some of the very things that you and I are going to talk about in this class. So I think it's just like it was meant to be, and the timing is right. So I reluctantly stepped into doing it all, I guess. Yeah.
That's a big undertaking. I mean, like you said, you're busy adding teaching and building curriculums and all that kind of stuff on top of that. That's a lot.
It really is. I question my choices every day.
We all do. We all do.
Yeah.
But there's no better way to do what you're doing than just to try it. You're tackling all this consistent topics across all your practices, and it sounds like you're kind of fiddling it in and figuring it out, and it's starting to drop into place. So I want to start though on the commercial side of your practice, digital, which you and I have worked together on.
Mm-hmm.
It's been a number of years now on several
Mm-hmm.
projects. You've come in and helped us work out some on some retouching.
Mm-hmm.
How did you start your own? What triggered you to go out and say, "Hey, I'm going to start digital. I'm going to go out on my own, find my own clients, and do all this"? Was this something that it sounds like maybe it happened after your graduate degree, or how's the
Yeah, so
timing on
I've been
that?
retouching for like 11 or 12 years. Is that right? 12, 13 years? I don't know. It's been a while. I went to grad school 10 years ago. And so previous to grad school, I
Got it.
was working in-house at different studios. Box here in New York and Bespoke Digital are two memorable ones, but I kind of made the rounds of a lot of those places. And then some other kind of brands that were bigger that had in-house teams where I kind of cut my teeth and learned the basics. And then, yeah, when I went to grad school, I was in Boston, but still trying to retouch, but there's no retouching industry in Boston. And so it forced me to work remotely and really get into the freelance thing, which worked to some degree. It was enough to get me by, which was great. But when I came back to New York after I graduated, I really, I think, pursued that avenue more fiercely because I liked working independently. I think I mean, again, like the two teams that I mentioned, the Box and Bespoke, there was such great culture there that like they were one of the few places where if someone asked me to come in studio, I wouldn't be a brat about it.
Yeah.
But in most places, like you're dealing with other people's technology, you're dealing with the fact that you're not like a fixture someplace. And again, because of my artistic career, I didn't want a full-time job somewhere. So I was always inevitably the freelancer that I was getting the temporary desk that had everybody else's shortcuts on it. And just like having to like upload that stuff every time, like always just kind of bugged me. So I think having my own studio, being able to build out my schedule in a way that was subservient to my art career and going on residencies or doing lectures
Mhm.
places was great because I was always coming back to a home base that was predictable to me. The downside is, as I'm sure you're very well aware of, is, going out and finding clients and like doing that type of work, which was new to me. And to be honest, I'm still learning how to do that. I think out of like everything, that is my like weak point, because as a small business owner, you're always kind of in the process of outreach and hustling, and yeah, it doesn't come natural to me, but that what comes with the territory, I
I mean,
suppose.
and it's always changing, and the landscape's changing, and you
Yeah,
got to adjust. And it's always going to be like that. I mean, even when you're busy, it feels like it's a struggle sometimes. So,
yeah, totally.
that being said, kind of coming up in studios like Box and that, kind of hustling and working through there, like you said, cutting your teeth, and then coming back to, you went to Boston school, came back, started building your freelance career. That on top of, you said you wanted to keep freelance because you wanted to keep working as be a working artist. All this mixed together, how, there's a big topic that we talk about nowadays is, burnout, especially in the freelance world, when you're going to try and take on every project you can and do every opportunity you
Mhm.
can to try and get you to that next step or get that next job. How do you manage that with all this going on, and now teaching at this point? I mean, have you figured it out? And if so, or are you on your way, or, how does this work?
No, I have not figured it out. I'm envious of the people that have work-life balance. That sounds really nice. I definitely don't have it, don't know what it is. Those words are foreign in my mouth. But it's weird because it's a double-edged sword. I guess on the one hand, I do it to myself. Like, I don't have to do all the things that I'm doing. Like, it's already enough to run a business. And as you know, like, being a business owner, you also have to do marketing, you have to do finance stuff, you have to do, outreach and all these different things. And, you may not be good at all those things. And so that in and of itself could very easily be a full-time job. And many
Oh,
people would consider it a full-time job. And yet I'm doing all this other stuff too. And I think if I had picked one thing, I would probably get further faster. And that is probably a point of contention for me. I work at a glacial pace because I'm juggling all of these different
yeah.
things at once. However, I will say that the flip side to that is I think it refreshes something inside of me in terms of the burnout, like creative burnout specifically. Like, I'm tired, but there's a creative burnout that I think that's separate than being physically tired. And so, for instance, like, I'm working on a new book project right now that I'm kind of stuck on. And that's great because I have this other photo project. And that's great because then there's a retouching client that's coming in. And because they all operate, in a very similar space, whatever retouching challenges I have in my commercial life sometimes inspires what happens in my creative life, and they talk back and forth to each other in a very active way that I think helps me to never be bored and just keeps me like creatively and intellectually engaged. And so that's the upside to it, and that's why I think I'll probably never change, because I do like the fact that it's they infuse each other, and there's a dialogue that goes back and forth. But yeah, I haven't mastered balance in that degree at all. I will say in the past like couple years, I've had some health complications, and that has forced me to like reconsider what that actually means, like in a applied sense, like especially with the commercial work, which I think tends to drain me a little bit more. When I turn off for the weekend, I turn off. I don't check my
Good.
email. Like, if I get an email at like 8 o'clock at night, if I'm at my computer, fine, I'll respond. But like, I'm not checking. Like, I'm not like, if we're off the clock, we're off the clock, and that is like my little tiny act of defiance, I guess, in
That's
this
good. I
process.
mean, it's
Yeah.
incredibly hard to do at times.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know if it's great in terms of business because everybody's expected to kind of be on call these days, but I guess I need to
Though,
put my foot down somewhere.
I always figure nowadays, similar to you, as I've gotten older, I'm recognizing more the importance of that work-life balance and taking that time to yourself, and not always constantly have the machine going, which is
Yeah.
hard to do. But when you're able to rest, or even with you, maybe switching to your between like an art practice, or maybe you're teaching, or this and that, being able to kind of reset your brain on a certain topic or a certain task that you can come back to later and be fresh about it. So I don't know. I feel like if clients are running some of us ragged, they're not going to get the best work anyway. So
Yeah,
let
that's
us
that's
sleep.
probably true. Yeah. What do you do to recharge yourself? Do you have a work-life balance? I mean,
Yeah,
you
you
also
know
have a
what?
family too, so I imagine that
Yeah,
that's like, a whole nother
mine
element.
really came at when my daughter was born. Up until my
Yeah.
daughter was born, I think similarly to a lot of people in our industry, or in the creative industry in general, I was very tied to my work, and it was kind of like a reflection of my self-worth in a way.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah,
if
of
work's going
course.
well, I'm doing well, and stuff like that, which can be very unhealthy. But when my daughter came, it was like this little switch went off in my head. I'm like, work doesn't matter. Like, it's all about this right now. It's my daughter. It's family. And, I started making those changes of, I'm going to work from 8 to 5. At 5, my daughter's going to get home, and we do family stuff at night and spend the weekends with her. There's still times where I'll have to do some stuff at night maybe, or work a little time on the weekend, but it's more planned and it's thought out. I'm not sitting in the chair for, 20 hours on a weekend taking on an extra project.
Yeah.
So it was really like having a daughter, we have a son coming this summer, so I think it's going to even
Oh,
impact it
that's
even more.
exciting. Yeah.
um,
Congratulations. That's so
Thank
cool.
you. Thank you very much. It's one of those things I figure it out, figure it out as we go. But yeah, it's an important part of it. And I think it's so hard to find that work balance, especially in this day and age where everything's faster and cheaper, and you just have to work that much harder to get attention and to get
Oh,
work.
yeah.
And it's partly you got to do good work and keep hustling in that, and part of it's luck. And yeah, who knows? The other part, I don't know what it is. It's something that you have to do.
Yeah. Fairy dust, I think.
Right, fairy dust. So from digital, your commercial side. Now let's talk about your artistic side, like kind of your art practice,
Yeah.
and kind of. I want to know, like, so when you went to grad school, what was that for? Was that for specifics of? Was that within like what you're practicing today, or?
Yeah. So I got my master's in photography and integrated media. And my thesis work was about two projects, one of which was called The Intentional Object, and the other was called Phantom Limb, both of which really kind of deal with the same idea. And that is, I was taking portraits of people that were close to me, friends, lovers, acquaintances, who were not models by any mean. They were just normal humans. And then I was retouching them to beauty industry standards, but then removing the original photographic image. So what was left was just the mark making. And so many of the images are either all black or all white. And the black or the white, the void area was where the photograph existed. And then you saw these like painterly effects that came in from trying to erase pores or
Mhm.
tattoos or a hickey or a flyaway hair or adjust fabric or something. And to me, this was just such a perfect representation of something that I was coming across as a retoucher, which is to touch someone is an intimate act. Like
Oh
you're
yeah,
really getting up into people's skin, and it's kind of like monkeys preening each other or something. There was like you're like really at
yeah.
like 300, 400, 500% on an image, like getting up in someone's like nose hairs or whatever. And I thought of that as actually very very intimate, and I loved that. And so the images are all the things that would be normally removed from a commercial image, but for me were the most unique and important parts of people. And so I wanted to embrace the imperfections of the people around me through that. And the images end up looking quite unnerving and grotesque. And
Yeah.
it was really interesting, like graduating college. And I was kind of a lone wolf in college and doing stuff that was very different. I was in a program that, despite the title, was really focused on a lot of historical process stuff. So
Hmm.
there was people working with like salt prints and tintypes
Really.
and that sort of stuff. And then me thinking about the future of photography and digital. And even though our like methodologies were kind of similar in the sense that there was like a handmade quality to it, I don't think people really knew how to address the work at its core in any kind of conceptual or theoretical way. So I was just running amok in that program, just being confrontational at critiques and like just being like a terror in class.
A
And
true
then
art student. Yeah.
yeah, and then when I got out, I was like, well, I don't know how I fit into the photo community, to be honest with you. And I have had this kind of contentious relationship with fine art photography. If it's like traditional photography, how we think of using the camera in the appropriate way, I guess
Hmm.
would be the right way to say it. And so I gravitated towards a lot of new media artists or people working in like augmented spaces. And so we're entering this space right now. I think where those two worlds are, the bridge between them is shortening, and so
Totally.
I feel much more like in service to what's happening now. But there was a good like 6 or 7 years where I'm like, I love this work, but I don't know how to engage with the art world with it. I don't think photographers know what to do with it. And I don't really fit. I'm kind of too square for like new media artists. I'm not like techie enough to fit there. So I just never really felt like I fit. But that's changing.
Hmm.
And, you know, as you know, we're just like having a renaissance in terms of like imaging technologies. So I feel like I fit, but it is, you know, it's moving very quickly, even for me. So.
Oh God, yeah. And you know what? So the work you're just talking about, your graduate work, for anybody listening, head over to Danielle's website and take a look at it. Because when I first saw this work, it was a number of years ago. I think when we started working with you, I was looking at your site and your portfolio and came across this. And as a retoucher, seeing it, it was so familiar, right? Like,
Mhm.
you know, I see this, it's great and everything. And the thing that seeing it, but it's the context you're putting it in and seeing it there, you know, the amount of time that is spent doing that, hours sometimes, you know, hours and
Mhm.
hours to get all this. But when you take away that back image, it's like all this perfection. Okay, it's all there, but it's kind of meaningless without the actual person. Like it's really
Mhm.
nothing. It's just cover up. It's this, it's that. But I loved it. It was fantastic. I love seeing it in the context that you were putting it in, especially coming from a retouching background and seeing it in this environment because it was just so familiar too. But so if you guys haven't seen Daniel's work before, head over there, take a look at it. And I think it's a great showcase of like how, you know, between your retouching commercial practice, how that carries over into what you do as an artist. And now this leeway coming in, like you said, maybe you're starting to find your way with a lot of this more augmented reality with AI and a lot of the generative creation that may be going on, which you've also started working with in some of your personal projects, as I've seen. When it comes to your personal practice and kind of transitioning into the scope of AI, artificial intelligence, what, you know, when it first, I mean, a number of years ago, maybe 2016, 17 is when there was some rumblings, and it's kind of been building since. I think these last few years, I feel like since Chat GTP and
Mhm.
Mid Journey and that really took off. Now it's kind of getting mainstream, and you know, Adobe Firefly, and it's kind of everything's just being hammered with it right now. But when everything kind of was coming to the surface and you started learning about this, what were your first like interactions and reactions to seeing this kind of capabilities, how it could be used, how it might affect your work?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I'm kind of several minds about it because I think how I approach it as an artist who is both thinking about things critically as well as from a place of curiosity, deep curiosity, and then of course how it affects me in a commercial context is different. So I feel like there's several answers here, but yeah, I think I started to be aware of it in like 2016. It was like Google's Deep Dream came out, and then there's all those like super psychedelic images that were like trained on a data set of puppy slugs, and so everything was just like totally just like absurd looking. And I think, yeah, that was like right after I graduated, and I'm just like, oh, this seems like right up my alley. But the tools were still like, you still had to have like some programming experience, and that wasn't me. I even for a while tried to teach myself Python, and I'm just like, oh, I can't do this. Like, I like maybe I should actually go revisit it again. But like, I was just like, I am just like, I don't have the brain for like math and like semantic stuff like this. Like, I just like, I really tried but couldn't do it. But I respect people who can, and I'm friends with those types of nerds. So it was in my periphery for a while, and I didn't really know, you know, at the time, those images were like super low resolution. It's like 200 pixels by 200 pixels, and it's like trying to hallucinate something, but in terms of like photorealism or any kind of uncanniness, we're not really there yet in terms of it being like a conversation within photography. It's not there. We're not thinking about it in that way. And then over the last like, and I've been kind of like background processing it since then. Like, I'm not a fast thinker when it comes to my creative work. Like, I will sit on ideas for sometimes years.
Hmm.
So I had been thinking about it since then, but really doing very little with it besides just like reading a lot and talking to other people. And then when, Mid-Journey and all of these, more easily accessible, democratized tools came out, and the resolutions and the photorealism quality to it really started to get better. I was like, oh, this is, terrifying and baffling, but also like it lost some of the magic for me. I think what's exciting for me is when a technology is like burgeoning and it's like just coming into itself and it's bad because of it, and to be able to like break a tool up into its atomized parts as an artist and deconstruct it and try
Yeah.
and figure out how it works, that's where it's exciting to me. And so now it's a thing that feels frictionless and accurate, and like it feels photorealistic. And so I'm like, oh, okay, like so now you're just making pretty pictures. I don't care at all. Like from an artistic standpoint, I don't care at all. From like an ethical or cultural or like conceptual, theoretical, all those things, historical context, like all these ideas, I find it still very interesting. But in terms of art making, the last thing I wanted to do was make it an AI image, like a jump on the bandwagon with everybody. And I tried, and I'm just like, I just don't care, because for me personally, and I'm not like ragging on people who are making this type of art. There are artists that are doing it that are making really interesting, compelling work, but I think for me it's about having friction and a kind of tension between myself and the tool. And when it becomes easy, or it becomes like I just I have to turn it upside down, I have to open it up, I have to break it. And so at the time and even to this day, like unless you are training your own data set, which I think is like becoming way easier now to do, there's no reason why I couldn't do that. But unless you're going that route where you have control over every aspect of the tool, just using some of these like out of the box tools, I simply don't care from from an
No,
artist
I mean,
standpoint.
that is
Yeah,
incredibly refreshing to hear.
yeah,
And it aligns with a lot of how I feel too. Like
yeah,
it's nice to hear this, especially from
yeah,
somebody in the industry and working professional.
yeah,
Um,
totally.
and as a technology, I think kind of what you're saying, it's still in its infancy. It's still, it's still early.
Yeah.
But your point about, that interest in using it to make art. Then you mentioned like if you can train your own data sets, that's a big kind of like barrier to entry for me to really get interested in creating with it
Hmm.
for a personal reason
Hmm.
aside from a commercial side point. But the control, yeah, of course it's fun to play with and do this and that and see what it can do. But when it comes to make making something, creating something, and having control, there is a disconnection there still.
Yeah,
Um,
so I'm co-teaching a class, a workshop this summer called AI as an Icebreaker,
Amazing.
which I'm co-teaching it with a very talented photographer, Alexei Yuanev, who I've been friends with for like a decade or more, maybe 2 decades. We've been friends for a very long time, and he's an artist and photojournalist. And so our practices are very different, but we're both thinking about the tools in the same way. And so we are teaching a class on using AI as a photographer and integrating it into your practice. But think about it in terms of Marshall McLuhan's favorite quote: "The medium is the message." And like actually, like why choose AI for your art practice? Not saying it's good or bad or whatever, but just like have some intentionality, but for which you use a certain tool, and either rail against its imperfections or use it in an intended way, but do it with some kind of intentionality behind it. So trying to apply some kind of formal art theory to these new tools. So
Yeah.
despite my like complicated relationship with it, I do think it's exciting to learn new tools. And so yeah, we're still teaching it.
Yeah, the view of using it as a tool. I mean, I'm on that bandwagon of there's people that it's going to, especially as retouchers, oh, it's going to take your job. It's you're not
Hmm.
going to have a job in 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, five, whatever. You know, I think once as a working retoucher and using the tools and experimenting with them just to see what's out there, there really isn't anything out there that can replace what we're doing right now. Even in 10 years, I think things can they can probably get very, very good at doing certain things. But there's still interactions like we kind of talk about when running your own business. Within retouching, yeah, there's the technical side of retouching, but then there's the non-technical side of retouching too. There's context, there's communication, there's all these other things that factor into how you're retouching, and then depending on the project, I think too, it's an artistic form of what you're doing too. If you're changing an image to look a certain way, a stylistic approach, stuff like this, but using AI as a tool, like a tool in Photoshop, a tool, something to assist you in doing your job. That's what I see it building as. I mean, I see it more on the fact that it could make our jobs easier and faster.
Yeah.
Hopefully we can keep charging the same or more.
Yeah, that is
Right.
the unknown, isn't it?
Yeah. So, I mean, it sounds like from the class you're teaching, you said it's an AI icebreaker um,
Yeah,
thing.
that's going to be the first class. Yeah.
Yeah. What so it sounds like your point of view too is so much as you be very conscious about how you're perhaps using AI within bringing it into your practice and understand, what it's doing and how you're using it.
Yeah, I mean, on one side, like again, I try to take everything I say with a grain of salt, even if I have strong opinions. But I feel like, I'm an advocate for the democratization of tools and people having access to being creative. I think that's, even if you don't consider yourself an artist, I think having access to tools like this from a place of curiosity is only a good thing. I think
Yeah.
that's cool, and I want to empower people's creativity. And obviously, there's a lot of artists who have historically been working with artificial intelligence for years now. There's talented people out there that are doing really interesting, compelling work that's grounded in like an art historical context. So even my hot takes, this shouldn't negate the fact that there's people making really smart, good work out there. Just with regard to my own practice and the things that make my heart sing, I have my opinions, right?
Yeah.
But I agree with you that, like, in regard to post production in our industry, I feel like I've already actually felt shifts in the last 6 months. And I don't know if I should be blaming it on what's happening with AI, or if brands or companies are becoming a little reticent to hiring smaller boutiques. It sounds like they're doing a lot of hiring, in house, and it seems like there's just like a lot of shifts happening. And I can't help but wonder how much of this is a response to the anxiety around AI.
Yeah.
I guess I really won't know, but I do feel like there is kind of a sea change happening.
Hmm.
I do agree with you that the best tools and the ones I think that will have longevity in our industry will be ones that facilitate our jobs, but don't take the autonomy of the artist away. A tiny plug. My partner in love and life is, he is the CTO of an AI company called Ozu, and they're building a tool for videographers and people in post production, but working with video. And it's something to facilitate their lives and make their work easier, so they can get to the creative making faster. And so I think if we think about AI as one tiny step into facilitating our workload, that is a good thing. Like, I think that can be great, but those are not the tools that get the most press, because it's not as flashy.
Yeah.
We're thinking about these things, at least in a media context, as something that's going to replace humans. But anybody that's worked with any kind of technology knows that AI is still stupid. Like, it's still a dumb tool. Like, it's still, like, as much as like it feels like it's otherworldly, like it's still clunky. There's still issues. There's a lot of problems. And so I think people will try to replace us, because that's just like how capitalism works, right? Like, if we can remove the places in which there's a lot of money being spent. So I think brands and companies will attempt to do that. But at the end of the day, like you said, there is still, even in a retouching practice, there's still a subjective artistic quality to it that involves some kind of human intervention.
Mhm.
And so if you can marry the technician or the artist with the tool in such a way that it helps them out, I think that will be the sweet spot. Personally, I hope, like, I have optimism that that will be the way that it goes. But who it's anybody's guess, I think, at this point, how things actually shake out.
Yeah, and this brings up like the question of kind of along the topics of using it as a tool, using it as building upon the artist or such. What are your thoughts about yeah, these tools are readily available now, even though maybe
Hmm.
they're not even the best tools to be using. They're more we're learning, right?
Hmm.
But they're showing up in things like
Hmm.
you can kind of, I mean, it's changing, but like you could tell like, oh, that photo was AI generated. It has that look,
Hmm.
but now you can tell if there are certain things. I mean, there's a lot of certain use cases for it. I think in imagery that makes sense if you're expanding an image or trying to upres an image. There's some very useful things in there.
Hmm.
But then we're also talking about perhaps the creativity or the quality around an image that's created. Do you think AI is going to have an effect on the quality of content that's going to be putting out there? Do you think there's going to be, I mean, it's hard to say. I don't want to say like bad quality content or bad quality imagery, or it's hard to say anything like that. But similar to how, when social media hit and user generated content for brands was being used and stuff like this, do you think there's going to be another way of, like AI generated user content for, I don't know, around the web? I guess what I'm trying to get to is, what is AI going to do to the quality of content or artwork or things that we're making in our world now if it's pulling the human artist perhaps a little bit more away from the process?
Yeah, maybe. I think I'll only answer that question in response to like the work that we do. And I suspect that, brands like any other business are thinking about the bottom line. And if they can get images out there that are good enough, that might be good enough. And so, we've even seen in the last like 10 or 15 years, like the quality of retouching and the amount of time and labor spent per image has generally gone down, and that culturally affects aesthetics, right? And so, like,
Yeah.
then, 2012, 2013, there was that whole like, and it's still around, but the no retouching movement. And we're talking like culturally about retouched images. And so, this idea of images being retouched is becoming villainized, I think, for a lot of really good, reasonable reasons. And yet, we're still retouching them, but we've made the aesthetic of the clean, no retouch look in vogue to in service of this economic demand that's happening, which is we don't have budgets to spend however many hours on an image because we don't want to pay retouchers that long. So we're going to make it a fad that, we're going to embrace the fact that there's this cultural like rebuke to what's happening and being like, oh yeah, we don't, this is all natural. And it's like,
Great, it'll save us money. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So I do think there's like an AI aesthetic that is emerging out of the popularization of these tools, and that will bleed into the commercial realm, and what
Hmm.
stock images look like, and what fashion images look like, and there's that kind of recursive process between the artist and commerce and the tools, and it'll keep going back and forth until it creates some kind of new visual culture altogether. So, and which is kind of exciting to see how those trends
Yeah,
emerge too. Like, I
totally.
really love the fact that AI still has trouble with fingers in hands, and it's just like, yeah, let's make six fingers sexy now. Like,
Right.
let's just embrace the
Who
fact that
cares?
like
Yeah.
we can't solve digits on a hand, so let's just make more digits. This is cool. So yeah, I don't know, there's something maybe inevitable there, but also kind of comical as well.
No, maybe it's speaking truth to us and what our future holds. I don't know.
Yeah.
But and it's funny you mentioned just it's not, it doesn't get everything right. It's still learning. It depends on what you train your data on. It's a whole factor of things that are going into AI and how these tools function. But on the repercussion side of it, there's been a lot of conversation about ethics,
Hmm.
and kind of, who's creating this image, who has the rights to an AI image, who, how are these going to be used both in a commercial sense, but also as an art piece too? Because, if you're training on data sets that uses other people's images, or if they're copyrighted, not copyrighted, who knows? Some companies say they only use licensed or free reign images, but how are you going to double check that? I don't know. What do you have any concerns about, like as all this content's being made and proliferated throughout everything now, and it's this wheel's already going. How are we going to control ownership? How are we going to control creative license on things that are created? Or are these lines going to get even blurrier?
I mean, it's a good question that I don't know if I have a clean answer to. I do know that the whole copyright issue, as I understand it right now, supposedly AI images can't be
I think that's right.
copyrighted.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I suspect that will in time be revised. I don't think that doesn't sound like a forever state. I don't think we on a like legislative state know how to handle this. And also because it's moving so quickly and there's a lot of, like you said, like contingencies, like how ethical is the data set? How do we check how ethical the data set is? What are ethical constraints in this particular, like
Yeah.
there's so many, like at so many levels, there's things to be handled and unpacked there. So I suspect the copywriting thing will be an open conversation that is talked about over and over again until it becomes rote and we have a better handle on what's going on. But until then, it's complicated. And then, of course, there's actual just artists who are making work with it. And, they probably, I feel like they do have a right to have some like copyright, like rights to them. So yeah, I think it's an open-ended question that needs to be answered still. I don't want to say I'm fine with it, whatever direction it goes, but it's hard for me to surmise the right direction legislatively. But I do think that just having conversations around ethics is really important, and how we develop data sets that are large and diverse. And the permissions, like you said, are really like, some structures for how we handle permissions for what's included in a data set, and like consensual use of images, because like you said, there's like, where are these scraped from the internet?
Mm-hmm.
Are they using stock photograph sites? Are they, there's all these different things like, I think it's called style transfer, when you make
Yeah.
images in the style of, someone else's work or whatever. And maybe that's okay when we're talking about someone who's dead, like Picasso, but maybe it's not so great when we're talking about a living artist and like how that affects their livelihood. So there's like so many like facets to this that I think I have a hard time even wrapping my brain around the
Oh yeah.
ramifications of all those things. But it's going to be a very big conversation for a long time. That's for sure. I think what I'm even more interested in some ways, and this had to do with our practice as retouchers, is in 2017 in France, and I think in the UK as well, they were able to create some like laws around Photoshop and like the ethical use of those things
Mm-hmm.
in commercial context. And so I've had clients before from the UK where you could only retouch to a certain amount and use certain tools. So like using the liquefy tool to slim someone's body was out of the question. But if you were using dodging and burning to do like some very light work that you're just like a shadow's too dark, or there's an errant strand of a piece of fabric where it feels more temporary than a physical thing,
Yep.
or more temporary than a like a permanent alteration. So there's actually some countries that are thinking about legislation and have done stuff about it.
Yeah.
The U.S. though is we're a free market, so I don't think
Might be
we'll
hard.
ever have any kind of legislation around this stuff. So in some ways, it makes me particularly concerned for Americans or countries who are operated in a free market, where they're just like, whatever, the consumer will figure it out. They need to be visually literate. That's their job. So I'm concerned with visual literacy as a whole with regard to these things, and getting people, just not just artists, but like the common man, like to understand how images work in kind of like the a la Jean Berger way, because I feel like they function differently now than they
Oh,
have
totally.
before.
I mean,
Yeah.
even just the sole understanding of if an image is AI generated or not, it's hard to
Yeah.
tell sometimes, and
Sometimes it
you might
is.
not
I've
know.
been fooled.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's funny, we had a project recently where the client pulled stock that we were doing some compositing with, and this and that. And in the NDA we were signing, and we had another agreement, it was that we could not use any AI generated assets. But one of the things they pulled from one of the stock sites had it was an AI generated photo, and you could tell when you zoom in and look at it. And so I emailed them, and they're like, "Oh, I didn't even know I had pulled this." Like
Oh
they
yeah.
do on some of the sites have little like AI generated prompt, but they're not
Yep.
always that noticeable. But yeah,
Yeah,
crazy.
I've seen some of these like stock sites now using AI generated images, and that's like especially complicated when some of those images have like a political context to this. So, for instance, Fred Richin, who's been writing about synthetic images for the last 40 years, as long as I've been alive, basically, and he's the dean at ICP. He has a book coming out, I think, at the end of the year called "The Synthetic Eye" or "Synthetic Images" or something along those lines. But he's had some other books leading up to this, beginning with his commentary on Photoshop, I think in like the late 90s or like 92 or whatever.
Mm,
In any case, like it's a real problem when you have a news outlet using a synthetic image of people protesting. Like,
crazy.
are you like, are you out of your mind? Like, this is not cool. Like, as
Yeah.
much as like as an artist, I'm excited about the prospects of things. Like, there's certain contexts that I think the weight of an image is different, and that's a thing that we will have to reckon with. That
Hmm.
the cat is already out of the bag, and we're dealing with it right now. And I
Yeah.
don't know. It's going to be a tricky one to like get back on some kind of like guardrails about, because I feel like the photojournalist community, I think treating that differently than some of these other
It
ways
needs
we're
to be.
talking about it is different.
Yeah, similar to like they do the typical photography sense of not altering images for
Hmm.
documentary purposes and such
Hmm.
in news.
Yeah.
Well, I do want to transition over to your own art practice and maybe the tools you've been experimenting with and using in the AI realm.
Hmm.
I know you recently had a submission into
Dear Dave.
Dear Dave, yes, along with
Yeah.
some notable people. Do you let us know can you kind of walk me through the project and your process through this?
Yeah, sure. Dear Dave, the editor in chief, Stephen Fraley, he invited me. It was one of they've only done like one or two issues where they had a theme, and I don't remember how many years that they've been around, but it was only a few issues that they've actually had a themed issue, and it's essentially like a photography forward portfolio magazine. So it's image
Mhm.
based, some text, some essay, but it's really like image centric. And so he asked me if I wanted to contribute. And at the time, like I said, I hadn't made any work with AI that I was like publicly calling, like putting in my portfolio. Like I had
Yeah.
played with it, but I was resistant to making, AI generated images for all the reasons we talked about. But I liked the idea of having someone like give me the prompt and the constraints to do something about it. And because I have a lot of opinions, I felt like, okay, this is a good opportunity for me to make something that kind of talks about the things that I'm struggling with, but subverts the way that people are using the tool. And so it's called an incantation in 12 prompts. And it's basically a breakup poem in 12 stanzas, where each stanza is a prompt that I put into a text to image GAN. And so I'm writing the text. The AI isn't. And as I said, it's like it's the main character is the narrator is going through a breakup or determining whether they should break up with their partner. Their partner is the medium of photography itself. And so, what happens when the photographer is disenchanted with the shortcomings of the photographic medium? Do they go to like newer and more shinier tools, or do they double down in the fact that it's an imperfect medium and just embrace that thing? And so I feed the little text stanzas into this GAN. And what I get out of it are, as you can imagine, these low resolution thumbnails. And at the time, I was using older models because, again, I like the kind of hallucinatory effect. And so I wanted the images to feel imprecise in the same way, not imprecise, but associative in the same way that poetry is associative. And so I wanted those thumbnails to be kind of loose and weird. And then I used those images. I generated maybe like 20 or so thumbnails per stanza. And then I used those images to bring into the studio and to create photographic images from. So I used them basically as an icebreaker in the studio using practical effects and lighting techniques, and then very light kind of strategic retouching and digital manipulation tools. I wanted it to like toe the line between people wondering like, is this a photograph? It has a surreal quality to it. Is this fake? Is this real? Like I wanted it to toe that line. So yeah, that's kind of like the gist of that. And I love the idea of also just like, it's a photography magazine. I'm going to write something. Like I'm not going to
Right?
give you an image. I'm
Yeah.
going to give you text, because that's is like my little punk rock gesture to this whole
Nice.
thing. Yeah.
Well, that's fantastic. So like photography magazine, you're spitting text. And I know you said in the past, when you went to graduate school, you were also studying kind of like multimedia. So not
Hmm.
maybe just photography, but there's a broader range of things there to create with. Within multimedia, I know you did a project kind of recontextualizing some of the images from the Met's their digital
Hmm.
archive.
Yeah.
Um, I'd love to hear a little bit about that, but also within that multimedia kind of area, do you ever see yourself incorporating other forms of AI, augmented reality, or any of those kinds of things into that practice?
Yeah, I mean the short answer to the second question is that yes, I'm really interested in the photographic index, and how I use that is very broadly. And so I've used photogrammetry tools before, and made like animations using like those tools. But in some ways, like the Met series, all of these series have, even though if it's not obvious in an aesthetic way, kind of focus around different types of archives. And so with the Met, it's the Met's digital archive online. With any kind of like the breakup poem, the incantation in 12 prompts, the archive is the data set, which you don't see, but I'm dealing
Nice,
with.
yeah,
And so there's like this
awesome.
dealing with like massive amounts of images, and like how you sort and process through them. And yeah, so I think that's the through line there. And yeah, I'm open to I think most all tools, if they begin with photography as a starting point. For some reason, despite my like love hate relationship with photographs, I still like seeing the world through them. So I'm always open to thinking about new tools that think about um, imaging and imaging technologies. Project is called If Not Here, Then Where. And I started that in 2021 in the middle of the pandemic. And it was a response to the fact, and I still kind of feel this way, although I'm slightly more tolerant, is that I hate engaging with artwork online mediated by screens, unless, of course, the artwork was made for screens. Like that's different, of
Makes
course.
sense.
But like, I don't want to see a sculpture online. I don't care if it's made with AR. Like I do not care. I like if it's made with marble, I want to see the marble. That's
Yeah.
just like, I need to see it in the round. And so in the middle of the pandemic, of course, I didn't have a choice, like the rest of us. And so I reluctantly started going to these museums that were offering that had claimed to digitize their collections.
That's
And
right. They
so
were doing, yeah.
yeah, and so there's like a big like push like in like 2019 or 2020, whenever it was that's really started to take off. And so I'm like, okay, well, this is the best I'm going to get for the foreseeable future. Might as well just make peace with it, if I want any kind of like cultural intake in my life. And it actually became really great, because I think I'm much more familiar with the Met's collection than I ever had been before,
Oh,
because
yeah.
they've digitized over 500,000 artifacts, and that number is growing. It's like the majority of their collection, stuff that is maybe that would never be seen or curated into physical shows. And so like they're not going to curate maybe pieces of broken pottery or like anonymous postcards or love letters. Some of that stuff is just stuff that would be, sitting in storage, and they just have it, but it's not on public display. And so in some
Yeah.
ways, I think we're kind of lucky to be able to see all of those things. And they have this thing where it's called open access images. And so they've built an in-browser search engine that you can search their digital archive. You can go to it now. Anybody, it's open, free, and to the public. And you can click on open access images, and it's
Oh, nice.
basically like public domain images that they encourage people to download and use.
Oh,
And
wonderful.
so that's what I use to basically make these very delicate, fragile paper sculptures of just like cutouts of artifacts. I use tape and wire and tape them and rephotograph them on mirror. And I was basically pulling them out of their historical context to create these like amalgam, like hyper sculptures that were flimsy, would blow around in the wind, and like didn't last very long, except for the service of being in this photograph. And it felt like a perfect analogy for how digital images circulate online, and how like there's this one essay by Heido Sterol, who is she's an artist and theorist, and she wrote an essay on efflux, I think in like, I don't know, 2010 or 2009, something like that, about what's in praise of the, oh, I forget the name of it's in praise of the cheap image, or the crappy image or something. I'm bastardizing the title, but in any case, she talks about the JPEG as this fifth generation bastard child of the real thing. And so I love the idea of digital images and like JPEGs being the trash of the internet.
Yeah.
And so it just felt like these little paper sculptures were like the trash of the internet that I was just printing out and collecting and like making these artifacts of. And of course there's a double entendre there of like artifact as the physical archaeological artifact, and then the artifact as like the digital like photographic artifact.
Well, wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, we're getting close to our time here. That was a
Yeah.
fast hour, and we didn't touch upon a lot of different things. So maybe we'll have to come back and continue talking about AI, photography, art practice, and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I'm sure there'll be more to talk about in 6 months or a year's time.
Every week there's going to be something to talk about, probably.
I know.
But, well, before we sign off, I guess, you know, on a final note from you, say we're the last day of one of your classes at ICP, what's one takeaway you'd want people to kind of think about or hear about, perhaps maybe the future of AI, or maybe what are you hopeful for in the future of AI within photography and art?
Oh, that's a big question. What am I hopeful for? You asked the pessimist this question.
Make you think.
Yeah, I guess the thing is, I'm going to kind of subvert this answer a little bit. I don't know if it'll answer it directly, but I think as artists, we have a responsibility to, or as I would like to say, as photographic artists, I feel like we have a responsibility to be critical about the tools that we use, because they are always changing. And so I think as retouchers too, like, you know, we need to be critical on how these things function in the world and how they aid, you know, like the economy and structures of power and all of these different things. But at the same time, to be both equal measures critical as well as curious. And so as much as things are really complicated right now and super exhausting, and maybe there's not a lot of clear answers in sight, I also think it's a really cool time to be alive, because we have all these things at our disposal, at our fingertips to play with and investigate, and hopefully we can find some good ways to talk about them. But yeah, I don't know. It's a good time to be alive, and so that's hopeful, I think, you know.
I think it is. That's good. Yeah. That's fantastic. Well, where can people find you? Instagram, LinkedIn, website. What's your website? We'll post all this too, so
my website is danielleezzo.com. I'm on the internet, you know, reluctantly, on Twitter and Instagram at the same, DANZZO. So yeah, and wherever else, I don't know. You can probably find me some other questionable places too. But
just
you know,
Google your name, and
we'll just Google me, and you know, yeah, exactly, yeah.
Well, wonderful.
There's gotta be a couple dark secrets on the internet for all of us.
Heck yeah.
You're not really living a good life if not.
No, not at all. It's out there forever, ever and ever. Well, thank you so much for joining me. Great hour, great conversation. You know, you got to come back and talk. You got a lot to offer in these conversations. So, heck yeah.
Peter, it was such a pleasure. I really love our conversations. I want to continue them on and off the camera. So let's just keep it going.
Of course.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you all for listening. We'll see you next time.
Yeah, thank you.